Hi guys, so for this activity I want you to answer this 10-mark question with an item. Obviously for the item questions, always read the question before you read the item. So it's applying material from item A, analyse 2 effects of the labelling process on individuals and groups. So before you do anything else, make sure you chunk it. So labelling, okay, make sure you've chunked that, and then individuals and groups. It's just really important that you recognise that this isn't specifying talking just about, criminals and deviants. It does also give you the leeway, if you like, to talk about individuals and groups within the criminal justice system. So the police, the courts, for example, as well, and perhaps even victims, but I'm not entirely sure how I'd make that connection. So read through the item then. Labelling theorists argue that an act is not inherently criminal, it only becomes so when it is labelled as such. They are interested in the ways that labelling affects the actions of those with the power to label acts as criminal, such as the police and courts. Being labelled can also have important effects on individuals to whom the label is attached, and labelling a group as a criminal can even lead to higher rates of crime being recorded. So before you look at the next slide, identify which 2 hooks from that item you would use. It sounds like a complex item, but there are, I think, 2 quite nice hooks you could use to develop 2 points about. So the 2 strongest hooks, if you like, that I identified from this item was, firstly, the idea that labelling affects the actions of those in power to label, such as the police and courts. So I'd like you to think, if you want to use that link, how does the labelling of certain individuals and groups, how does it actually affect the behaviour of the police and the courts and the sort of criminal justice system itself? And you need to remember the studies that you could write about. You need to talk about examples to demonstrate how that process actually happens, and of course use a range of concepts and clearly show you understand the concepts as well, all the while linking back to the question about labelling and how it affects individuals and groups. The second hook I've picked out is the idea that labelling a group as criminal can lead to higher rates of crime being recorded. So I'd like you to, if you want to use that particular hook, think how would you develop that point into a nice analytical paragraph explaining the impact of labelling on individuals and groups, okay? So for this question, it will take you 15 minutes to answer. You need to spend 15 minutes answering it, unless you get the additional time where you get an additional almost 3 minutes, if you like, so you get 18 minutes. You're welcome to look at this next slide before you answer it, but I'm going to ask you then to back and actually answer the question, okay, or self-assess, okay, using this criteria. So once you've answered it, I would like you to self-assess what you've done. So first thing, identify the hook, underline the hook, and then write hook in the margin. It will ideally appear in your very first sentence. You then need to read the rest of the point, and I think you need to read the whole of the point before you can decide whether it's analytical or not, before you make that decision. So read the rest of the point, and as you read it, underline the concepts and then do a little C above it. Underline the studies, do a little ST above them. If there's any mention of theory, underline it and write TH above it, so that's theoretical perspectives. In this question, I imagine it'll be Marxism and symbolic interactionism. And if you identify any examples in there, okay, just write EG, okay, and next to where there is clear use of examples. So that'd be case studies as well. Once you've read the entire paragraph that you've written, you then need to decide, is it analytical? Is there enough detail and depth to to identify it as analytical? In which case you can write AN next to it. Is it analytical? Or do you feel that what you've done is explained your ideas in a developed way? In which case, I'd write devel expla next to it. Is it just undeveloped explanation? So perhaps you've used a concept, a study, an example, and you've just stuck it in there, but you haven't really explained it and then perhaps connected that explanation back to the question. Or is it just describing? Have you literally just described a concept, a study, or an example with very little reference to the question? In which case, it's just descriptive, DES. Or perhaps you've made a big error and you've selected completely the wrong information and it's not relevant to the question. In which case, you write irrel in capitals. Now, and I guess most importantly, you need to look for the application. Most importantly, after the hook. So this is when you look for reference to where you discuss the effects of labelling. The effects of labelling on individuals and groups. Not the effects of labelling on criminal statistics, the effects of labelling on individuals and groups. These two areas must be connected, labelling and its impact on individuals and or groups. Wherever you see it, I want you to highlight it in a highlighter ideally, and write app, okay, next to it in the margins. It's really clear where the application is. The final thing you need to look out for is evaluation that is developed and relevant to the question. So is the evaluation fully explained? Is the point fully explained? And secondly, and this is really important, is it actually criticising the point that you've made? And is it connected to the question? So if you just stick on a point at the end saying, however, the problem with labelling theory is it ignores the victim, that has got nothing to do with the question, and it's probably going to have nothing to do with the point that you've made. So you get literally 0 credit for that evaluation because it wouldn't be relevant to the question. Okay? You need to make an evaluation point that is directly critical of at any point that you've made about the effect of labelling on groups and individuals. So that's what you're looking for. And then you'll do the same again for the next point. Once you've identified the areas that are perhaps a little weak or you haven't done from this list, you then need to improve your work. Okay, so you need to add improvements based on what you've missed from this list. Depending on how you're doing this, I want you now to, perhaps you've already answered it, and at this point you are now going to improve it. Okay, thank you.